A bustling office in downtown Chicago, where the hum of keyboards and coffee machines creates the soundtrack of everyday corporate life. The glass-walled conference rooms and open-plan workspace of Thompson and Associates had always prided itself on being a progressive workplace. But sometimes, the true test of values comes when you least expect it. David Chen had been CEO for just 8 months. Known for his quiet demeanor and data-driven approach, he wasn't the type to raise his voice or make dramatic gestures. His employees respected him, but few really knew him beyond his carefully crafted presentations and quarterly town halls. That all changed on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. The meeting was supposed to be routine, just another client presentation review. But what unfolded in Conference Room B would soon become the talk of all 12 floors of the Thompson and Associates building, and eventually, a story that would ripple through corporate America. Sarah Washington had been with the company for 5 years, steadily climbing the ranks to become one of their top project managers. Her track record was impeccable. She had brought in more new clients in the past year than any other manager. Her presentations were legendary, her client relationships rock solid. But none of that seemed to matter to their potential new client, whose subtle discriminatory comments had been growing increasingly obvious during the past 3 meetings. The tension in the room that morning was palpable. The client, a representative from a Fortune 500 company that could potentially double their annual revenue, had just made another thinly veiled racist remark. The kind that usually gets swept under the rug in corporate America, dismissed with uncomfortable glances and nervous laughter. The kind that leaves a deep, lasting wound while maintaining just enough deniability to avoid HR intervention. The room fell silent. Sarah maintained her professional composure, but her hands gripped the presentation pointer just a little tighter. Other team members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, eyes fixed on their notebooks or smartphones. It was the type of moment that defines a company's culture, not the values written on the wall, but the actions taken when those values are tested. That's when CEO David Chen did something unexpected. He closed his laptop slowly, deliberately, the soft click echoing in the silence. What happened next would not only transform the company's culture, but would also challenge the way businesses think about leadership, integrity, and the true cost of staying silent in the face of discrimination. Some say the most important moments in our lives happen in the blink of an eye, in those split seconds when we choose to either speak up or stay silent. As David Chen rose from his chair, no one could have predicted how his next words would spark a movement that would extend far beyond the walls of Thompson and Associates. But before I tell you what David Chen said, words that would soon be shared thousands of times across social media and discussed in corporate boardrooms nationwide, let me take you back to the events that led to this defining moment. Because to truly understand the impact of what happened that day, you need to know the full story. The real question isn't just about what happened next. It's about what you would do in that situation. Would you risk a multi-million-dollar contract to stand up for what's right? Would you have the courage to break the silence that too often surrounds these moments in corporate America? Stay tuned, because this story isn't just about one CEO's decision. It's about all of us, about the moments that define who we are, and about how sometimes the most powerful change starts with a single person refusing to accept the status quo. Looking back, the signs had been there from the beginning. It started with small things, the way the client, Mr. Richardson from Global Dynamics, would direct all his questions to other team members, even when Sarah was clearly the project lead, the way he'd check his phone whenever she presented market analysis, only to become suddenly engaged when others spoke. Little moments that could be dismissed as coincidence, but formed a pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. Sarah had seen it all before. Growing up in Detroit, she'd learned early that success meant working twice as hard for half the recognition. Her parents, both public school teachers, had instilled in her a quiet determination that became her trademark. "Your work speaks for itself," her father always said, and speak it did. Her innovative marketing strategies had transformed Thompson and Associates from a mid-tier agency to an industry leader. David Chen's own journey to the CEO position hadn't been straightforward either. The son of Chinese immigrants who ran a small grocery store in Seattle, he'd worked his way through college, earned his MBA, and spent 15 years in various leadership roles before landing the top spot at Thompson and Associates. His leadership style was shaped by watching his parents handle difficult customers with unfailing grace and dignity, never compromising their values for a quick profit. The weeks leading up to that fateful Tuesday had been intense. The potential contract with Global Dynamics represented not just money, but a chance to establish Thompson and Associates as a major player in corporate consulting. Team members were pulling all-nighters, fine-tuning presentations, and triple-checking data. Sarah had been the driving force behind it all, coordinating teams across 3 time zones, anticipating problems before they arose. But Mr. Richardson's behavior had grown increasingly problematic with each meeting. First came the compliments about how articulate she was, delivered with a tone of surprise that made everyone wince. Then the suggestions that perhaps someone else should lead the final presentation, someone who might connect better with their executive board. The implications were clear as day. The morning of the presentation, Sarah arrived early, as usual. She'd spent hours preparing. Her presentation was flawless, and she even picked up coffee for the entire team, a small gesture that exemplified her leadership style. The office was starting to fill up, the usual morning buzz of activity building as people settled into their desks. What nobody knew was that David Chin had also arrived early that day. From his office, he had observed the subtle dynamics playing out over the past weeks. He'd seen the toll it was taking on not just Sarah, but the entire team. He'd noticed how other employees watched these interactions, gauging whether Thompson and Associates truly lived up to its stated values. As the team gathered in Conference Room B, the stakes couldn't have been higher. Global Dynamics represented a $50 million contract, the kind of deal that could make careers, fund expansions, and secure bonuses for everyone. The kind of deal that most CEOs would do anything to land. The presentation started perfectly. Sarah's delivery was impeccable, her command of the data absolute. The slides were crisp, the numbers compelling. Everything was going according to plan until Mr. Richardson raised his hand with that smirk that had become all too familiar to everyone in the room. "I have some concerns," Mr. Richardson drawled, adjusting his Italian silk tie. "While your team's work is impressive, I wonder if we might benefit from a different perspective in the final stages. Someone with more traditional experience in our industry." His eyes deliberately avoided Sarah as he directed his comments to David Chin. The room temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. Sarah's colleagues exchanged uncomfortable glances, the kind that spoke volumes without saying a word. Through it all, Sarah maintained her professional demeanor, though her knuckles had turned white from gripping her presentation clicker. But it was what happened next that made the moment unforgettable. Before Sarah could respond, Mr. Richardson continued, "Perhaps someone who naturally fits in with our corporate culture. You understand what I mean, don't you, Mr. Chen?" The weight of those words hung in the air like smoke. Tom from accounting suddenly became very interested in his shoes. Rachel from marketing appeared to be holding her breath. In corporate America, these were the moments usually swept under the rug, filed away under things we don't talk about, and dealt with through carefully worded HR emails. David Chen sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable. 20 years of corporate experience had taught him how to handle difficult situations. He knew exactly how most CEOs would handle this moment. A diplomatic redirect, a nervous laugh, maybe a vague promise to consider all options. After all, $50 million could fund the company's expansion plans, secure everyone's bonuses, and cement his position as CEO. The silence stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Sarah began gathering her materials, her movements precise and controlled, years of similar experiences evident in her practiced response. She'd already started her usual mental pep talk, the one that had gotten her through countless moments like these. But then David Chin did something that would soon be discussed in business schools and corporate training sessions across the country. He stood up slowly, deliberately, his chair scraping against the floor in the silent room. What he was about to say would not only change the course of Thompson and Associates, but would spark conversations about workplace dignity that would reach far beyond their glass-walled conference room. The security of a $50 million contract hung in the balance. Careers could be made or broken in the next few moments. David Chen looked around the room, making eye contact with each person present, before finally fixing his gaze on Mr. Richardson. The tension was electric, the kind that makes your skin tingle and your heart race. As David Chen opened his mouth to speak, everyone in that room knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. Some would later say they saw a slight smile cross his face. Others would remember a flash of steel in his eyes. But what everyone agrees on is that what happened next would change everything. David Chen's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Mr. Richardson, I'd like to share something with you before I respond to your suggestion." He pulled out his phone and placed it on the conference table, its screen displaying an email chain. "This morning, I received some interesting correspondence from 3 other companies that recently declined to work with Global Dynamics." Mr. Richardson's confident smirk faltered slightly. In the corner, Sarah remained standing, her presentation materials still half gathered, watching the scene unfold with the rest of the stunned room. "It seems," David continued, his voice steady and clear, "that we're not the first company to experience this kind of feedback from you, but we will be the last." He turned to address the entire room, his next words carrying the weight of years of silent moments just like this one. "What you don't know, Mr. Richardson, is that Sarah Washington isn't just our project lead. 3 months ago, I offered her a position as our new Chief Operating Officer, effective next month. We've kept it quiet until the official announcement next week." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sarah herself looked stunned. This wasn't how the announcement was supposed to happen. But David wasn't finished. He turned back to Mr. Richardson, whose face had begun to redden. "So when you suggest we need someone with more traditional experience, I have to wonder, would that be someone with Sarah's track record of increasing client retention by 40%? Or perhaps someone who's generated $30 million in new business in just 1 year? Or maybe someone who created our revolutionary client engagement strategy that, ironically, your own board of directors praised just last week?" The silence in the room was deafening. Through the glass walls, curious onlookers had begun to gather, drawn by the unusual scene unfolding in Conference Room B. Mr. Richardson's phone buzzed, likely his supervisor wondering why the meeting was running long. But before he could reach for it, another voice spoke up. It was Lisa, the junior account manager who had been quietly taking notes in the corner. Her voice trembled slightly but grew stronger with each word. "I think everyone should know what Mr. Richardson said to me in the break room before this meeting." She glanced at Sarah apologetically, then at David, who nodded encouragingly. The revelation she was about to share would transform this from a single act of discrimination into something much bigger, something that would force every person in that room, and soon every person watching this story, to confront their own moments of silence in the face of injustice. As Lisa began to speak, Sarah's phone lit up with a notification. The board of directors was calling an emergency meeting. In the next few minutes, decisions would be made that would affect not just the future of Thompson and Associates, but potentially the entire industry's approach to workplace discrimination. The story was about to take another unexpected turn, one that would test not just David Chen's leadership, but every employee's courage to stand up for what's right. Lisa's voice grew stronger as she shared her account. "Mr. Richardson told me that if I wanted to advance in this industry, I needed to understand how things really work. He said he could make sure Global Dynamics hired me instead, away from the diversity quota hires at Thompson and Associates." She looked directly at Mr. Richardson, whose face had turned ashen. "I recorded the entire conversation." The room erupted in murmurs. Mr. Richardson jumped to his feet, his chair rolling backward into the glass wall. "This is preposterous. Do you have any idea who you're dealing with? One call to my board, and I'll—" "Already done," David Chen interrupted, holding up his phone. "I took the liberty of sending everything. The complaints from other companies, Lisa's recording, and the video feed from this meeting, to your board of directors 10 minutes ago. They're particularly interested in why their company's being mentioned in multiple discrimination complaints." Sarah stepped forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Richardson, as the incoming COO of Thompson and Associates, I think we're done here." She gathered her presentation materials with deliberate care. And you should know, those 3 companies that turned you down, they're now our clients. Turns out, ethical business practices are good for the bottom line. Just then, every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. Global Dynamics had released an emergency press statement announcing the immediate suspension of Mr. Richardson pending investigation. But that wasn't what made everyone's jaws drop. It was the second part of the announcement. Global Dynamics' board of directors was implementing a comprehensive corporate culture overhaul, and they wanted Thompson and Associates to lead it, not just as consultants, but as architects of a new industry standard for workplace equality. The contract would be worth twice the original proposal. David Chin looked around the room, taking in the shocked faces of his team. "Let me be clear about something," he said. "What happened today isn't about winning contracts or making headlines. It's about who we are when it matters most." He turned to Sarah. "And speaking of who we are, Sarah, I know we plan to announce your promotion next week, but there's something else you should know." He slid a folder across the table. "The board and I have been discussing this for months. We don't just want you as COO. When I step down next year to focus on our international expansion, we want you as CEO." The silence that followed was broken by spontaneous applause, not just from inside the conference room, but from the gathered crowd outside. Employees from every floor had congregated, having heard snippets of what was unfolding. The glass walls that had once seemed to represent corporate barriers now symbolized transparency and change. But it was what happened next that truly demonstrated the impact of that day. One by one, employees began sharing their own stories. Right there in conference room B, years of silenced voices finally spoke up, each story building upon the last, creating a momentum that would soon extend far beyond Thompson and Associates. A month later, when Sarah took the stage at the National Business Leadership Conference to share this story, she didn't just talk about discrimination or corporate politics. She talked about courage, not just the bold, dramatic kind shown by David Chin, but the quiet courage of people like Lisa who choose to speak up despite their fear. The video of David Chin's stand went viral, but the real story wasn't in what people saw, it was in what happened afterward. Thompson and Associates' new corporate culture initiative became a model for companies nationwide. Their client list tripled. More importantly, they received thousands of job applications from people who wanted to work somewhere their voice would be heard. As for Mr. Richardson, well, that's another story, one that proves karma has a corporate address too. But the real twist in this tale wasn't about winning or losing. It was about how one moment of choosing right over easy can create waves of change that impact countless lives. Today, if you visit Thompson and Associates, you'll notice something unusual in Conference Room B. The glass walls remain, but etched into them are 2 simple words: courage spoken here. Because sometimes the biggest changes start with the smallest acts of bravery, in the most ordinary places, on the most unexpected Tuesday mornings. 1 year later, the impact of that rainy Tuesday morning continues to ripple through corporate America. Sarah Washington's first act as CEO wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of a traditional company-wide memo, she held a town hall meeting where employees at all levels could share their experiences and ideas. The Courage Conversations, as they came to be known, are now monthly events at every Thompson and Associates office worldwide. Lisa, the junior account manager whose recording helped expose the truth, was promoted to head of corporate culture and inclusion, a position she created and pitched to the board herself. Her program for empowering employees to speak up against discrimination has been adopted by over 200 companies nationwide. David Chin didn't completely step away as planned. Instead, he channels his energy into mentoring promising executives from underrepresented backgrounds, not just at Thompson and Associates, but across the industry. True leadership, he often says, isn't about making safe choices. It's about making right choices. The glass walls of Conference Room B became something of a corporate legend. Other companies started etching their own values into their conference room walls, not as mere decorations, but as daily reminders of promises to keep. Some say it sparked a transparency revolution in corporate culture, though Sarah just calls it doing the right thing where everyone can see it. Global Dynamics underwent its own transformation. After Mr. Richardson's departure, they hired their first diverse executive board, with several positions filled by talented professionals who had previously been overlooked. Their stock price hit record highs, proving that ethical business practices and profitability aren't mutually exclusive. But perhaps the most meaningful change wasn't in policies or promotions. It was in the small moments. An intern feeling confident enough to question a senior executive's assumption, a manager standing up for their team member in a client meeting, a CEO taking time to listen to the cleaning staff's concerns. These moments, multiplied across days and departments and cities, created a new normal in workplace culture. The original viral video of David Chen's stand has now been viewed millions of times and is used in business schools as a case study in ethical leadership. But as Sarah often points out in her keynote speeches, the real story isn't about one person's courage. It's about what happens when people realize their collective power to create change. Thompson and Associates did more than just survive the loss of what seemed like a make-or-break contract. They thrived, proving that standing up for what's right isn't just good ethics, it's good business. Their client list now includes companies who specifically seek them out for their proven commitment to integrity and equal opportunity. As I wrap up this story, you might be wondering what happened to that original recording that Lisa made. Well, it's now part of the orientation package at Thompson and Associates, along with a simple question for every new employee. What will you do in your moment of choice? Because that's what this story is really about, choices. The choice to speak up when silence feels safer. The choice to stand firm when pressure mounts to compromise. The choice to believe that one person's actions can inspire others to find their voice. In the end, the legacy of that Tuesday morning isn't written on glass walls or corporate policies. It lives in the courage of ordinary people who choose to do extraordinary things, one moment at a time. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most powerful message of all, that in our own moments of choice, we too can choose to stand up, speak out, and create change that echoes far beyond the walls of any conference room.